So can I just welcome all of you? It's just brilliant. This is our third Zoom meeting like this, and I feel like I'm amongst old friends, which is really nice. Old in the nicest sense of the word, you know, not old, but friends from before. And what's nice about this is that it's an opportunity for you to come in and hopefully be entertained and interested in the subject, but also an opportunity for you also after about a half an hour to go into a smaller group and chat with some of the other Super Troopers, which I know you all enjoy very much. So, well, at least those of you who stay around to do that. And then we'll come back into the main session and then we'll have a question and answer with Helen. So it's an opportunity then for you to put any questions that have occurred to you during our chat to her. So I now want to welcome Helen to our meeting. It's just brilliant to have you here, Helen. You came onto my radar some time ago. I think you were on Sunday Politics with Andrew Neil.
Yes.
You were regular on that, and I was always very impressed by your sort of, I don't know, calm authority, I think I'd call it, on that particular program. And then since then you've popped up on Have I Got News for You, and is it the news quiz that you're on radio sometimes?
Yeah, that's one.
And of course you've now written this book, which I've got here, obviously called Difficult Women. And I was very interested when I knew that you'd written this book, so I bought it and read it and found it fascinating. And what you've done is you've called it a history of feminism in 11 fights. So I think the way that I'd like to start is really asking you about why did you call it Difficult Women, and I suppose the other part of it is why did you actually want to write this book in the first place? So we'll start with that, with those questions.
Yeah, I spent a long time resisting writing a book about feminism because I thought it was a one-way ticket to a lot of people shouting at me. But I've been writing about the subject in various forums for more than a decade, and it kind of made sense to gather it all into one place. And actually, you know, I had thought about what's the most interesting thing to write about, and I pitched the book in late 2017, which to me came off the heels of, you know, Brexit campaign, whichever side you were on. I think most people agree it was pretty acrid. You know, there was a lot of, you know, unpleasant level tenor to that debate. And then the election of Donald Trump, which I think you probably say the same. So two big political events that had felt like lots of people felt angry, lots of people felt they weren't heard. You know, and for progressive politics, which is my own personal politics, it felt like two very big losses, really. And so what I thought was the sort of subtext of the book is not only to write about feminism, but two subjects very close to my heart. One is, how do you actually make things happen? You know, what is the process by which things change? You know, I think it's extraordinary to me that here we are in 2020, 150 years ago, the first women were going to university. You know, 100 years ago, some women still couldn't vote. The truly universal suffrage only came out in 1928. You know, all of the, you know, we didn't have equal pay. This is the 50th anniversary this year. So these big milestones that women have fought for, and men alongside them, you know, how did they actually happen? What compromises do people have to make? What were the kind of levers that they had to pull? And the second thing was to try and address this tendency that I feel now when we talk about history, that people find it very difficult to deal with the fact that people in the past weren't like them, didn't share their beliefs, you know, were a mixture of good and bad. And one of the things that came out very strongly from writing about feminism is that, you know, women are socialized, I think, often to be ladylike. And I remember, you know, spending my whole childhood being told to sort of sit properly and keep quiet and, you know, be kind of, you know, girls are made of sugar and spice and all things nice and all of that. And that's not really very helpful advice if you want to kind of go out and kick some ass and change some laws. So it's not surprising to me that actually so many of the feminist pioneers that we might revere in an abstract sense, when you look at them up close, they were kind of nightmares. You know, people you probably wouldn't have wanted to spend too much time around. They were really difficult. So not just in the sense of having views that are now very unpalatable to modern sensibilities, but also in terms of their personalities. So the Pankhursts, for example, who ran the Women's Social and Political Union, the militant suffragette organisation that was incredibly instrumental in getting women the vote, you know, they ran it like dictators. They ruthlessly chucked people out, including one of the Pankhurst daughters, who was considered, you know, insufficiently devoted to the cause. She was more interested in left-wing politics. She was gone, out. You know, they were really pretty ruthless about, and they were pretty ruthless about the fact you couldn't do anything else. You know, the vote was the cause. You couldn't be a general do-gooder. That was your one thing and you had to do it. It came before anything else. And I think that's quite a hard thing for women to say, to put themselves first like that. So those were the kind of competing themes that I wanted to bring out through this sort of structure of fights.
And what would you say that during the course of writing the book, did you learn that you weren't aware of before, either about the women's movement or about feminism in general? You know, what were the surprises?
I think that there was so much infighting accompanied absolutely every single thing that got done. You know, I mentioned the suffragettes there, and that period is characterized by the fact that you had the militant suffragettes who were, you know, bombing stuff, setting fires, burning. Sorry about the sirens in the background. I live right next to a hospital, unhelpfully. You know, all of this stuff that they were doing, which was incredibly alienating to lots of people. People thought this wasn't the way to go about it. You know, at the same time, the suffragists, led by Millicent Garrett Fawcett, were, you know, sending in petitions, holding huge marches. But the thing that struck me about that is Millicent Garrett Fawcett, a woman I hugely admire, said the really notable thing was that there'd been 50 years of these polite civil protests, and they'd been politely ignored. And then the suffragettes turned up and they were hysterically denounced. But everybody was talking about women's suffrage, which was really important because lots of other issues, you know, were being pushed to the fore, like Irish Home Rule at the time. So there was a benefit to them to being kind of unreasonable and screaming and, you know, to my mind, borderline terrorists, which is something that gets washed away in the 1920s as the histories begin to be written, because no one wants to sit with that uncomfortable feeling that they're celebrating violence. They don't want to feel that that's, you know, the way that their rights were won. So that was one of the things that consistently kind of came up. And yeah, and, you know, having been in various online feminist battles on Twitter and places like that, to see quite how deeply scarred lots of women have been by their involvement in the women's movement. You know, how when you're doing campaigning and stuff like that, people's feelings run incredibly high. And, you know, you're not necessarily there to make friends, you're there to accomplish something. And that's quite hard for people to accept, I think. So, and then finally, and one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you today was the incredible radicalism of older women and the fact that they get written out and they don't get celebrated because they don't get seen as being change makers, right? They get seen as everybody's mums or grandmas who are there to make the sandwiches, not the ones who are there to, you know, actually do the campaigning and the changing of minds. And my final chapter is about three brilliant women in their 60s and 70s from Northern Ireland who heard about a young woman who got arrested for buying the morning after pill online. This was 2 years ago when abortion was still completely illegal in Northern Ireland, except for cases of fatal fetal abnormality. And they decided it really, you know, it wasn't fair that younger women were taking the hit for all of this, and it was their job to stand up for this. They also felt that, you know, if you got arrested for buying abortion pills online, it was something that counted against you on your disclosure and barring form if you wanted to work with vulnerable adults or children. And it also affected your visa to work in places like Australia and America. And they felt they couldn't ask younger women to make those sacrifices. So they went out, even though this was an issue that no longer affected them, they're all long past the menopause, but they felt they had to show solidarity with the women that it was affecting. And I just didn't expect them to be quite so radical. And I reflect in the book about the fact that that was my prejudice in internalizing that assumption that older women, aren't like that. And I met so many veterans of the second wave. You know, it was just kind of astonishing to me. I talked to Maureen Colquhoun, who was the first openly lesbian MP. She's 92 next month. And it's very hard to reconcile the little old lady with the quavery voice with the fact that she was terrifying in her day. And it really made me reflect on the fact that I don't think we do celebrate older women and their achievements enough. And they do get written out of history.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I think for a lot of the audience watching, we have very long memories, and I do feel very passionately that I've been a beneficiary of a lot of the things that these difficult women did. I've been able to have a career. I got divorced without too much difficulty when I needed to. I've been able to work. I've been able to control my finances. I've been able to control how many children I've had. And I don't dismiss that, you know what I mean? I'm aware of it. I am very, very conscious that now I'm 72, that the era through which I've lived has been one that has progressively given me more and more rights to have the life that I would like to lead. Because, 100%. Plus, I think we as a generation would be interesting when we get into the discussion. We also were at the effect of some of this, you know, sexism and misogyny and some of the other things that went on. I was definitely in the 1980s and had to battle quite hard. I think the other thing you said at the beginning about how some of these women, you know, were almost like terrorists. They had to be like terrorists, but they also had terrible things done to them, didn't they? I mean, you know, you look at the history of the women's movement and you look at how they were treated, and of course the suffrage movement in particular was particularly violent with all the appalling things that were done to them. So, you know, it hasn't been easy. It has been a struggle. I guess I want to come on to, we agreed that we'd talk a little bit about Erin Pizzey. Before we do that, was there one standout woman throughout the whole thing that you really felt a great deal of gratitude to, if you like?
Oh, I mean, all of them in their own way, and we'll talk about, as you say, Erin in a minute. But in Maureen is another example. The fact that she came out as gay in 1976 is, to me, absolutely astonishing. There were plenty of, you know, gay men in the Commons at that time, but, you know, you kept quiet about it. And Matthew Parris has since written about it. He was first elected in 1979, and was kind of basically said the idea in the Tory party at the time was that, yeah, it's fine, you can be gay, but just let's, you know, don't make a big deal about it. Don't make a fuss about it. And she absolutely did make a fuss about it. She listed Babs, her partner, in Who's Who. And I thought, you know, that, and they were married for 45 years. Babs unfortunately died the week of my book's publication of coronavirus. Maureen had coronavirus. Babs died of other causes. But they were together for 45 years. And that is, you know, to me, is a love that is worth celebrating and a commitment that is worth celebrating. And I think, you know, I think it's wonderful that she and Babs lived long enough. They got married in 2015. So I find that story incredibly moving, because that to me is real progress. You know, these were people who wanted, their demand was nothing more than they wanted to be thought of as normal and regular people for being in love with each other. And within their lifetimes, they lived long enough to get that. And I found that really, really heartwarming.
But what's interesting about Maureen, do you say it Colquhoun?
Colquhoun, yeah.
That's how you say it. She was an unknown to me. I had never heard of her. And most of the people that you mention in your book, when you mention people like Anna Coote and Tess Gill and people like that, I know who you're talking about. You know, I would read these women when they were writing, you know, back in the day. And I think I thought I was reasonably clued up on the history of, you know, feminists and feminism, but they were quite, you know, she was one name that I had never heard of. And I think that sort of airbrushing out of history element to some people is also quite interesting when it comes to women who did stick their head above the parapet and wanted change. How the history books or the books that are written, the autobiographies or the biographies that are written, just, they're not there.
Well, there's a very honest line in Harriet Harman's when she talked about her, why she wrote her memoir of her time in New Labour, which was that she kept going to the other New Labour memoirs, flicking to the index and not finding herself there.
Yeah.
Which I was a kind of classic Harriet Harman thing to say, because it doesn't, you know, it's not the kind of thing you kind of classically reveal that you go and flick to the indexes to find out if anyone mentioned you. But you know what, she was deputy leader of the party. She passed something in the Equality Act 2010. That's the first time that age discrimination was enshrined in law as something that you can actually bring a tribunal case about. Incredibly important piece of legislation, not particularly much loved by the party at the time, right? Gordon Brown thought, you know, we can't really do anything about the economy. We can't be messing around with all this sort of identity politics stuff. And she absolutely pushed it through. And I don't think gets the credit for example, being childcare really on the map as a political issue. You know, turned up to the Commons in 1982, 5 months pregnant, one of less than 30 female MPs. I mean, you kind of have to admire the kind of great swinging brass ovaries of doing that, wherever you are on the political spectrum. But yeah, as you say, it's very easy to see these women drop out of history. And in the case of Maureen, I think it's very obvious what happened, which is that the Labour Party treated her pretty shabbily, actually. She got deselected by her own party, ostensibly for some comments about Enoch Powell, but really because that she was no longer a kind of family woman. And unlike Chris Smith, who turns up openly gay in 97, you know, that wasn't a great news story for the Labour Party to tell about itself and how progressive it was. So she didn't get the championing from her own side that she really deserved, and therefore she just missed out.
Yeah, indeed. So let's talk about Erin Pizzey. Now, Erin Pizzey, I remember really well, and at the time, because of what she did, I remember what she looked like. I can remember all the furore that, you know, she was quite good at self-promotion, and, you know, she was often to be seen, often to be heard. So tell us a little bit about her story, because she is very much a difficult woman, and also there's quite a lot that she's done subsequently that's not to like. So tell us her story. That's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, my mum is 75, and she wasn't, you know, particularly involved with feminism in the 70s. She got two small children. But when I said one of the women in my book is Erin Pizzey, she said, oh, yeah, I remember her, because as you say, she was on TV. So she founded the first domestic violence refuge in Britain in Chiswick in 1971. Basically managed to, I don't know, I presume by shouting at the council, got them to give her a house, which they then essentially kind of squatted. And they opened their doors to absolutely everybody. There was a constant problem of overcrowding. But, you know, what she did is she decided that domestic violence was just being treated as a, you know, as a normal part of marriage, you know, just a domestic. Police officers would turn up, see that it was a couple arguing as they saw it, and then go away again. They just weren't taking it at all seriously. And she was seeing women who were kind of covered in cigarette burns, women who had been profoundly beaten up, you know, strangled, all of these things. You know, women with detached retinas, people, you know, women punched so hard that they miscarried, all of these incredibly heartbreaking stories. And she decided that the only way to get it talked about was that she was going to kind of force herself into the public consciousness. So, you know, they had sit-ins in Downing Street. She was in the public gallery when Jack Ashley introduced the Domestic Abuse Bill in 1976 with some of her battered wives, as she would have called them. And I think that's an extraordinary story. And now, you know, the refuge movement is absolutely huge. There's more than 300 refuges, I think, in Britain, including 9 for men. You know, all kinds of domestic violence helplines. It's, you know, the government promised, although very little of it has been delivered, £76 million for domestic violence services extra in lockdown, because it's seen that, you know, this is a problem that still struggles to be taken completely seriously. The sentences handed out are still less than they would be for people beating each other up in the street. But it is one that is now something that is a term that people have heard of, and a concept that is no longer taken for granted, that it is a man's right to chastise his wife. So all of that, phenomenal. But Erin Pizzey fell out very dramatically with the feminist movement. She stormed out, either metaphorically or actually, of the Women's Liberation Conference in the mid-70s. And by 2009, she's writing Daily Mail articles saying that, you know, feminism has destroyed the nuclear family. It's, you know, that women can be just as violent as men, that couples are trapped in cycles of violence, that some women are addicted to violence, all these very heretical things. And, you know, that's a very difficult legacy to deal with. She's now the editor-at-large for an explicitly anti-feminist website. And what I find fascinating about Erin is, how do you deal with somebody in your history who wouldn't, you know, necessarily even want to be there? But also, how do you deal with the things that are really uncomfortable to talk about that she raises? So I don't agree with her about dysfunctional couples. I think male violence is a particular form of thing. You know, far more women are killed by men than the other way around. But she is right to say that it's very hard to separate out what exactly is wrong with a relationship. And we can end up talking about those things very, very simplistically. And actually that does inhibit their ability to solve some of those problems. But, you know, how do you walk that line of being a heretic to your own movement, and how do your successors deal with you? You know, she's not anywhere on Refuge, which is now the biggest charity in England that descended from a refuge. She's not anywhere on their website in their history anymore. I've been trying to talk about whether or not we can get a plaque put up on that first house, because it'll be their 50-year anniversary next year. Because I think, you know, whatever you think about her, I want that institution to be part of our heritage and our memory.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The chapter in your book about it, you know, you kind of make a point that she never really saw herself as a feminist as such. She had herself come from a very quite a violent family where violence was normalized, and she obviously felt quite strongly that she wanted to give women a place to go, but she didn't really identify strongly with that whole sort of feminist credo. So as such, she her concentration has been on the whole idea of violence as being something, as you say, the sort of heretical nature of it is that the women are asking for it sometimes, or they're addicted to it sometimes. You know, those things that are said as dismissive statements. Oh, well, you know, they just ask you about, oh, well, they are addicted to violence. That's why they go back. But I think it is quite interesting because it's a complex subject, but it's not, you know, and she is a complex woman within a complex subject.
And it's one of those things where I just feel that it doesn't get talked about because it's too complicated. So the big charities, not unreasonably to my view, talk all the time about 2 women killed by current or former partners every fortnight because they need to fundraise. They need to do that to stay open. There isn't enough money for perpetrator programs, for couples therapy, for anything beyond here's a place to stay if you absolutely need to get out now. So, you know, at the same time as that fundraising effort is happening, I don't feel that we're ever really getting to addressing the fundamental root causes of why are so many relationships, you know, so unhealthy. And that's a problem. Only 30% of women experiencing domestic violence end up using a refuge. You know, this is the tip of a pretty huge and unpleasant iceberg. And actually it just doesn't really get talked about because it's really unpleasant. As you mentioned, Tess Gill, who I talked to, worked for a time as a lawyer dealing with domestic violence cases and had to give it up because she said, you know, it's very hard to deal with the fact that the women go back. Yeah. And it's something you'll hear all the time if you talk to about it, because to outsiders, you just think, well, that, you know, someone hits you, that's it, your relationship will be over. But that's not how it's experienced by people in those relationships. And that's really, really hard for us not to be judgmental about and just stick to that she should have left line.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to Harriet Harman, who we've just mentioned, who was talking on, it was the week in Westminster on Saturday, and she was talking about how she's doing a cross-party amendment to the current domestic abuse bill that was introduced by Theresa May before she left office. And it's the, I wrote it down here because I couldn't remember what it is. Oh yes, the rough sex defense, which I'd never heard of. I thought that, you know, was incredible. So if a man murders his wife and she's got marks around her neck where he throttles her, the defense in court is that they were just having rough sex and she just happened to die. And they've managed to take that. They've managed to put that into the bill that is no longer a defence in law against murdering your wife. But
yeah, there were a couple of incredibly high-profile cases where someone was acquitted on exactly that, and it is the kind of new form of victim blaming. And actually, it's something that I think younger generations feminism has got to reflect on, actually, because there has been this knee-jerk liberalism that you can't criticise anyone else's sexual practices or sex life, but that's the highest form. And actually, therefore, stuff like choking, for example, has become something that's been incredibly normalised by pornography. And that has not really been a good thing for women overall. But yeah, as you say, one of the nicest things about that domestic abuse bill is that it has been a proper functional bit of politics, right? So as you say, it's got advocates on both the Tories and Labour benches and SNP and Lib Dems. And the same thing with the divorce bill that came along the week before last, a proper piece of cross-party legislation to say no fault divorce. You know, we think even if you're a social conservative, some marriages do end, and the best way for them to end is in a way that doesn't set parties against each other in this really hostile way right from day one in the court. It should be possible just to say it didn't work out. Now we're going to have a grown-up conversation about splitting our assets and access to children.
Yeah, it was very interesting listening to Harriet Harman pay tribute to Mark Garnier, who's a Conservative, and he actually had somebody in his constituency who was taken to court. Who died, that's right, and the defence was the rough sex defence, and he felt so strongly about it, and she paid tribute to how supportive he had been, and somebody else she mentioned who just came in recently at the last election, also a Conservative, who'd been an amazing help within that. So like you, I that heartens me a lot, this whole idea that the sort of, you know, the tribal conflict type stuff is going to, you know, in certain, there's the ice cream ban I warned you about, in certain circumstances has gone by the by, and that it is possible for these more domestic type of legislation to say, hang on a minute, this is about, this is for everybody, you know, this isn't a party political point or anything like that. So it's really heartening to see. How about just for the last part of this discussion, feminism today. So I'm quite bemused by this because I go onto Twitter quite often and read stuff, and some of it, my jaw drops open because I just think, what is going on here, you know? And I do find it quite hard to get my head around it. And I know that you've also had certain attacks leveled against you for various things. So how would you sum that up? You know, that we were in the 70s, if you like, if I count myself part of that movement, it was a sort of second wave after the first wave with the suffragettes, and we're probably in the third or fourth wave or whatever it is now. So how would you sum up where the debate is right now?
Yeah, I think the standard idea is that the current bit is the fourth wave. So the third wave really is the 1990s, talking about sexual harassment, you know, the Anita Hill case in the US, for example, and concerns about date rape and stuff like that. And then the fourth wave is this kind of much more digital form of feminism. And my headline thought on that really is that it's been brilliant for consciousness raising. I think, you know, young women have heard a lot about feminism, you know, feel it's something that's often quite important to their lives. My concern is always about the fact about whether or not that translates to political action. And I think that's the bit that I find slightly more questionable, is that a lot of the noise, I'm not sure that necessarily translates to policy changes and economic changes. So I end the book by saying, you know, if I had any kind of request for feminism, it would be to focus on structures, because that's the thing that's really hard to change. It's very easy to spend all your time patrolling other people's language, nitpicking over that kind of stuff, you know, having arguments about symbols. But wouldn't it be better if we properly funded childcare and elderly care? I think those would be the two things that would just help women in this country more than anything else, right? Getting your time back, your unpaid labor being valued properly by the state, you know, are almost more important than anything else. And not least because they give you more time to do other campaigning on other subjects. And all of that isn't really part of the conversation on Twitter, because it's quite, you know, there's a description of politics as the slow boring of hard boards. And that's what it is. You know, people, you know, the Victorian social reformers who looked into custody reforms, for example, were going at it for decades and decades. It's not something that you can just have a really big tweet storm about and expect to be fixed. So yeah, so that social media area of feminism has made people a lot more aware of some things. You know, personal experiences have really been brought out into the light. And sometimes that's been really brilliant, as in the case of the, you know, the vaginal mesh scandal, for example. Just that ability of things like Facebook to connect women all in the same thing, all being told that they must be exaggerating it so that there's nothing really wrong, this isn't a massive issue. Finding each other is a really positive use of social media, but as a tool for legislative change, it is pretty much useless, I would say.
One of the things that I think for our generation is quite interesting is that we're often quite sandwiched between the need to care for very aged parents. So you know, all the time that takes, all the energy that takes, all the worry and heartache that there is involved in that. And then you've also got your own children, if you like, who are asking you to look after their kids for them while they go to work. So, you know, you get into your late 60s and 70s and you're looking forward to having some time to yourself and maybe a bit of retirement, and to pursue some of the interests that you've had for a long time and not been able to. And suddenly you've got aged parents making demands, and you've got your children saying, look, I can't afford childcare, you know, can you look after the kids? And I do feel, I feel very, very sorry for some people who, because they're women again, and because they feel that they love their families and they want to give they want to give back, but they are very, you know, that they are very squashed by those, you know, those demands, and they don't seem to be on the radar particularly strongly, I don't think, of certainly at the moment, and I don't know what the solution to that is, but you know, it's the larger general solution of much better accessibility to childcare at one end, and then much better social care at the other end for those aged parents, could be looked after properly. Anyway, we're not going to solve that now, but
It'd be brilliant if we did. But yes, I think that's a big structural issue. But that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about being something that's really important for people who are interested in women's rights to campaign on, because you have to say this is an issue that is incredibly important. I know there's loads of other stuff going on in the world, but this one is worth paying attention to, and that's always a hard thing to do, to fight for that priority.
Yes, absolutely. So we are going to go down into a smaller group. Helen will be in one smaller group, so you'll get to meet for real 2 or 3, another 5 possibly of our group. Don't all disappear, everybody. Stay. I'll be in another group as well, and what will happen is that you will be invited to join a group. So something will come up on your screen. You just need to click on that. So Brian is at the moment doing all that's needed to put you into a group, and then we'll be given a warning after about 10 minutes that the group session is coming to an end. In your groups, it would be nice if you just introduced yourselves to each other. And I thought that the theme today could be something around feminist icons, if you like, or people that really made you aware of I don't know what you call feminist issues. I would name a couple of authors actually that raised my feminist consciousness. One was Doris Lessing, who I read in the 1970s, and her books were searing really in terms of my own sense of who I was as a young wife and mother. And the other one was Marilyn French's The Women's Room. So did you come to some kind of awareness or understanding of feminism through literature, or was it through maybe through activism even? But so a bit of a discussion perhaps about people that you regard as being your feminist icons, interesting people. By the way, we had a brilliant discussion in our group. How was yours, Helen?
Oh yeah, I found some fascinating. I had a teacher, someone who worked in the print industry, someone who worked in nursing. So we had some great conversations.
Yeah, so did we. It was really good and really, really interesting points being made there. So thank you for that. Thank you all of you who stayed around for that. So we've got lots of people back in for the questions. So Bryony, let me hand over to you now.
Yeah, we've had quite a few questions in the chat, but we've also had some sent by email in advance as well. So I've just picked out a couple and I'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. So we've had a question via chat about social media. I know we were talking about social media just before the break then, but Libby wanted to know, she says, we've witnessed how social media has been used to shut down debate and hate against women who speak out, including MPs. Do you think that if social media had been around during the movements like the suffragettes, do you think it would have been more difficult?
My answer to that is yes, but probably not for the reason you expect. The suffragettes got an incredible amount of abuse, not just being kind of, spat at and restrained by police, but there's a bit where someone throws a cabbage at Mary Gawthorpe, one of the suffragettes, and she says, I see one of the men in the audience has lost their head, and then throws it back at the audience, which I enjoyed. But actually the main difference, I think, is that you can only do that kind of campaigning alongside people that you know really well, because you're taking risks, right? If they, the suffragettes were subject to a huge amount of state surveillance, and actually if someone had kind of informed on them to the police, they would have been in a huge amount of trouble. You don't build up those kind of relationships with people over social media. You can only do them with people that you know face to face. So for them, having their headquarters in the Aldgate in London was incredibly important, and people's families being involved and having those strong ties. So my advice when you do any kind of feminist campaigning is that you need to, even if it starts online, you need to have some pretty serious conversations and some seriously stable bonds. It can't be someone you just know as an avatar and a handle.
Yeah, and an interesting question from Carol, and I'm sure that actually quite a lot of the viewers and a lot of our sort of demographic at Look Fabulous feel this way. And so Carol said, often older women feel empowered to speak up and to fight out for what they believe in, probably more so than some younger people. And yet in today's society, we're often seen as invisible. So what is it that our viewers today can do to be heard more?
Well, I don't think that's coincidental. I think there's when you look at kind of all the words that bad words that we use about older women, a lot of them relate to the fact that they don't care enough about other people's opinions, right? The idea that they're not frightened of particularly what men think of them, and they're not afraid to be outspoken and speak out. But I think that the two things that older women have got going for them is one, exactly that point, the fact that they are difficult like that. And two, particularly if you've begun to wind down your career slightly, if your children are a bit older and you've left home, you have the time to do the organising. And that's the thing that I think makes the biggest difference, is actually how much work you put in. Campaigning and fighting causes you believe in is work. And this country, to my mind, runs on all the older women who work at food banks or volunteer at National Trust properties or whatever it might be. All of this kind of quiet glue that holds society together is a lot of that is about older women. That, you know, they have the superpower of being really good at stuff and not caring too much what people think of them.
Okay, we had a question via email from Sue. She has quite a big question. She said, of all the fights you write about, which do you think has been the most important?
It's, well, I probably would have to say the vote, because without that you can't participate in democracy. And whatever you think about the suffragettes' use of violence, you know, they were locked out from being able to elect governments. You know, they were not allowed to sit as magistrates, they weren't allowed to be jurors. You know, they were entirely subject to a law which didn't at any point take in their interests into account. You know, their husbands or fathers were expected to exercise them on their account. But one of the, you know, the important things that I learned while researching this book is that you know, the fact that they were able to campaign in the way they were was built on earlier victories. So Lady Constance Lytton, who I write about, was a paid organiser for the Women's Social and Political Union. She was on £2 a week. She was able to live in her own flat. She wasn't married. You know, all of these things that would have been impossible 100 years earlier, before the Married Women's Property Act, before reforms that allowed women to lead these much more independent lives. So you kind of can't unpick one from another. And that's why now, when I say what's the most important thing now, I think unpaid caring labour is one of them, because if you are just completely knackered all of the time and completely overstretched, you don't have time to do any campaigning. You know, it's one of the reasons I think, you know, I feel very strongly about both prisons, which are an interest of mine, and disability rights, because you're talking about two groups of people who fundamentally find it very hard to access the media to talk about their problems. Yeah,
really interesting. One question that we had from email was from someone called Angela. She wanted to know, modern feminists, who are they? So who is it at the moment that's making a difference?
So, a short but not exhaustive list. My very good friend Caroline Criado Perez, who wrote Invisible Women, which is a brilliant book all about the data gap, which in a world that is increasingly run by machines, by the algorithm that shows you recommendations on Google or Amazon or wherever it might be, or, you know, decides how to put people on probation, the fact that those systems aren't built with women in mind is absolutely vital. So I think she's incredibly good. I also mentioned the book Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's a Nigerian feminist who's written several brilliant books and an absolutely fantastic TED Talk. She was sampled on a Beyonce record saying, you know, we teach girls to shrink themselves. And I think that's, you know, the way that she frames those issues in a narrative light is really, really interesting. So I love her a lot. Again, another friend of mine, Nimco Ali, an anti-FGM campaigner, and somebody who's actually both a Somali refugee and a conservative. So not many people's idea of what a feminist looks like, I think, in some ways. So she's done incredible work about it, and then finally had the first successful prosecution for FGM just a year or two ago. And that work, I think, has been really important. So yeah, when you look around, there are all kinds of different bits and pieces of feminism going on. You know, whether or not you agree with it, it's a very controversial subject. A Women's Place, for example, who campaign on women's single-sex spaces, have built a campaigning organisation in a matter of 2 or 3 years that is really formidable. So when you look around, there is really great work going on.
And just one final question, a nice fun one to end on. Claire wants to know, if you were having a feminist-themed dinner party, who would be the 5 guests that you would invite?
Well, the worst thing about that is that presumably they'd all absolutely hate each other. I mean, imagine having a feminist dinner party that's sort of like, you know, Germaine Greer, Andrea Dworkin, Joan of Arc. You know, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Strong women, particularly strong women who've had to come up through male dominated environments. I'm not going to use the word battle axe because it sounds very pejorative. I would love to be a battle axe one day, but you know what I mean? I think there'll probably be some thrown wine. You'd wonder to have some wipe clean surfaces in that feminist dinner party. But you know, one of the great things about doing this book is that I met so many incredible. Lady Brenda Hale, former chair of the Supreme Court. I would put her in my dinner party, mind like a razor. And actually, when I was talking to her, I thought, I'm really proud that you and I are on the same side, like that we're both, you know, that there's someone as smart and as impressive as you who cares about the things I care about. And that's what feminism has given to me, certainly.
Oh. Okay, well, that was it on the questions. I'll pass back to you now, Tricia. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks very much, Bryony. That's really brilliant indeed. I'm going to say thank you on behalf of everybody that's been enjoying this, I'm sure, very much. Your book is brilliant. So if you're looking for an excellent book with full of lots and lots of interesting stories, but also, you know, Helen's, if you like, her philosophy really around feminism as well, which I really enjoyed reading that. So I can thoroughly recommend it. And on behalf of everybody who's joined in, we were up to about 160 at one stage. We've lost a few people. They don't like going into those chats. But anyway, about 120 came back, which was lovely. So thank you very much on behalf of everybody, Helen. That was really excellent. Really enjoyed it very much indeed. And you know, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. So goodbye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.